everyone to confirm that they can hear me and see the beginning slide containing the title of today's presentation by clicking the raise hand button along the right-hand side of the screen. And I'll give you all a second to confirm that the audio is working. Okay, great. Thank you all very much. Today's topic is measuring traffic and use in large-scale trail networks. We have a great panel of presenters for you representing 3 such trail network projects around the country. Eric Oberg, calling in from his office in Yellow Springs, Ohio, is Director of Trail Development for Rails to Trails Conservancy's Midwest region. He is also RTC's project lead for the Industrial Heartland Trails Coalition, a gargantuan effort to create a 1,400-mile trail network spanning parts of Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, and New York. Eric will be discussing the ongoing counting efforts in the IHTC footprint. Next up is Shawn Megill Legendre, Senior Research Analyst at the Office of Environmental Planning and the Office of Energy and Climate Change Initiatives at the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, which serves the greater Philadelphia region. He plays an active part in DVRPC's crucial role in the Circuit Trails, a network that will eventually encompass 750 miles on both sides of the Delaware River in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Shawn will tell you about DVRPC's bike ped counts and show how they make that useful information available to the public. And last, but certainly not least, is Barry Bergman, Manager of Trail Development for Rails to Trails Conservancy's Western region based in Oakland, California. Barry is RTC's project lead for the Bay Area Trails Collaborative, a coalition of more than 36 organizations, agencies, and businesses working to develop a 2,500-mile regional trail network in the San Francisco Bay Area. Barry will discuss the collaborative strategies for a bottom-up approach to collecting and uploading count data. You'll be able to review these full bios and find contact information for all 3 presenters in the recorded version of the webinar that will be distributed after today's live presentations. Our presenters have a lot to cover in a very short amount of time, so I'm going to do my best to continue speeding through some of this basic housekeeping. First, as you may have noticed, attendees will not be able to speak during today's webinar. All attendees are automatically muted as they join to keep background noise to a minimum. If you have questions for our panelists, and we do encourage you to come up with some good ones, please type them in the question box, which can be expanded on the right-hand side of your screen. Feel free to ask questions at any time. We have built in plenty of time today to answer as many as possible at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical problems during the webinar, you may enter your issue in the question box as well. I will respond if I'm able, but your best course of action is to contact GoToWebinar's free customer support directly or view a selection of help topics at the links shown on the screen. If for whatever reason you lose the webinar connection, please re-click your login link. You will be able to rejoin the ongoing session at any time. And finally, after today's webinar, you will receive a follow-up email containing a survey asking you to rank our performance on today's webinar, more information about RTC's Trail Expert Network with a link to sign up for occasional email notices from us, and most importantly, a recorded version of today's webinar. And with that, let's get started. I'm going to pass it on over to Eric Oberg.
Thank you very much, Eli. I hope everybody can hear me, and thank you, everybody, for joining the webinar today. As Eli mentioned, I'm going to talk about the ongoing research in trail traffic monitoring for the Industrial Heartland Trails Coalition. The IHTC is a very bold project across 4 states and 48 counties. The vision statement for this project, as you can see, to establish the Industrial Heartland as a premier destination offering a 1,400-plus mile multi-use trail network experience. This vision was laid out about a little over 2 years ago by the partners in this part of the country. Early on, partners realized that we wanted to ensure that there was some baseline data for existing trail use. The IHTC, that 1,400-mile envisioned project, is about 48% complete. So there's right around just under 700 miles of trail on the ground in those corridors. We wanted to ensure that there was some monitoring going on within those corridors, but we also had a plan to track trends over time as gaps were being developed. there most certainly was a lot of discussion about how to efficiently track trail traffic in such a large network that covered such a massive footprint. You're talking all the way down to Parkersburg, West Virginia, and as far north as Erie, Pennsylvania, Chautauqua County, New York. A big footprint to try to get a handle on traffic. And so we knew that what we needed to do was create some modeling so that short duration counts, we could have some accurate forecasting. And so to do that, we tried to get some of the foremost people in the country that we know of that are doing this kind of work. And we were lucky enough to engage with Greg Lindsay from the University of Minnesota, who then brought in Jeffrey Wilson from Indiana University, Purdue University in Indianapolis, to work with us on creating a research project that would get us a system that we think is going to serve this project well. I had to put some of the initial some of the initial work and graphs and numbers that I got from the researchers on this slide. My background is not in statistics, it is not in data research, so some of this was as foreign to me as if a Martian was talking to me, and I hope maybe some of you on this webinar look at this and are asking the same question, what in the world are some of those? And I'll be honest and tell you, I can't explain some of those graphs. So it was really amazing work, and I'm just going to get to a little bit about where it put us, but I have to show those visuals. What we initially knew is that not all trails are alike, right? That is not a groundbreaking statement there. We understand that trails in downtown Pittsburgh, downtown Cleveland, through the core of urban Akron are not used in the same way or in the same numbers or with the same usage patterns as, say, small town, suburban, or extremely rural trail. And as trail managers, we all can look at trails and we understand the trails we're really familiar with and probably can make a really good, a very informed judgment on where we think some of those traffic patterns might change, where we might categorize the difference between an urban trail and a suburban trail. But over this large of a footprint and with almost 700 miles of open trail, that we decided we really needed to create a trail typology methodology to break the trail up in some way. And that's what Jeffrey Wilson brought to the table. He's a cartographer and GIS analyst, and created a methodology that we went through months and months and months and months of refining to get something that we thought actually made sense for trail managers on the ground. And it ended up coming up with 5 different trail typologies: urban, suburban, low intensity rural, which is essentially your small town, small rural town; forest, which is extremely rural. That doesn't mean it's in a forest necessarily, but that's your very rural typology. Then this parks typology is a rural typology, but it's in a destination. So south of Cleveland, you see those blue dots. That's Cuyahoga Valley National Park. And in this analysis, that came up as very rural, but we knew it had heavy traffic because it's a destination. Even though the surrounding characteristics of the analysis showed it as being extremely rural, we knew we had to find a way to tease out the fact that it was, yes, rural, but also a destination that brought in a lot of numbers. And that's where that parks typology came from. What then happened is we seeded half-mile buffers along every inch of open trail within the IHTC. And each one of those half-mile buffers were classified within one of those 5 typologies. The trail typologies, the trail typology methodology and analysis had about 14 different factors, all of them publicly available, so the methodology can be repeated anywhere else in the country. They included, road density within the half-mile, park area, designated forest area, water, cropland, population density, industrial intensity. There were a lot of different shape files and layers that were included to help inform this typology. We seeded each half-mile, a half-mile buffer along the trail system. Each one of those then came up as one of these 5 typologies. We then went through a couple rounds of randomly selecting 6 count locations per trail typology. This sounds maybe, and it is on the surface, a fairly simple thing to do, but accessibility matters as well. So we had to go through quite a few rounds to get 30 count locations that were all accessible enough to actually place a counter and be able to get out there and check it maybe under 3 feet of snow. So we were trying to find some places in the northern part that maybe weren't 2 or 3 miles from the nearest access point. But we also, because of the scientific nature of this research project, it needed to be a random selection. So that took more time and effort than certainly I thought. But what we eventually got was this convoluted mess that you see on your screen now of 30 locations within the IHTC Open Trail Network where we deployed counters, 6 per typology. And we used simple traffic passive infrared counters. Many of you are probably familiar with this technology, easily portable. Certainly there is higher, there are better counters out there as far as accuracy and some of the technology out there that gives you your bike ped differentials and direction of travel. This does not do any of those, but for what it is and for its ease of moving around and relative cost, they're about $500 a piece. It was a good choice for this type of work because we had so many locations. They worked really well for us. And those were deployed in November of 2016 in all 30 locations. And they were left out for a full 365 days. And some of those are still out, which obviously we're well past that 365-day threshold. And I will say over 30 locations, I knew that theft and vandalism is certainly always a concern when you're putting hardware out on public trails. I was very concerned about that. I will tell you that we only had 2 of the 30 stolen, which at the beginning of this project I would have taken probably the over on the over-under there. So I was, while not pleased, when you pull up to check a counter and find that it's nowhere to be found, you are never pleased. But at the end of a full year-long project like this, I have to say that 2 out of 30 was probably not too bad. And so we did okay there. This slide here, I apologize, the typology colors are not easy to see. I was trying to give you a representation of what they look like. You can see some very light colored circles. Those are the half-mile buffers color-coded by typology along the open trails. Once we got the 365-day count, the University of Minnesota came back in. We have got a wonderful grad student working under the supervision of Greg Lindsay, doing all of the factor modeling for us. And what they're doing is diving through the data, diving through all of the count data that came from all 30 of those counters. And we're obviously cleaning up apparitions, things that happen that maybe caused the count to be abnormally high or abnormally low, and cleaning things up, getting our average daily counts to a place that we're comfortable with, that we know are accurate to what was actually happening. And she's also, of course, analyzing weather patterns and all of that, and then lumping them into typologies to see whether or not our typologies actually have a real difference in patterns of use and amount of use and all of that. The idea going in was that we wanted to create we'll initially create all the way down to a daily factor model, although I think we will only start by using weekly factor models so that partners in the network can take short duration counts on any part of the open trail in the network, and we can give them a good factor model to extrapolate annual use. We want to be able to continue receiving all of this data from the partners, and it will continue to refine the factor modeling so that over time it becomes more and more and more accurate and as more and more data comes in. So this is a ongoing project with a whole lot of data coming in and a lot of analysis, number crunching, and modeling going on right now. We created a factor or a counter lending library for the partners on the ground. There's over 111 different organizations and municipalities and partners within the Industrial Heartland Trail Coalition. A huge number of those are very small. Many of them volunteer, and even some of the municipal public agencies don't have either the people power or the means to get counting hardware. So part of this project was to make sure we get counter hardware into the hands of our partners So those 30 counters are being collected, and we'll start a lending library to IHTC partners so that they have access to the hardware to continue doing this counting. And this has nothing to do with traffic counts. I just wanted to tell you that we're also, Rails to Trails Conservancy has traditionally done economic impact studies, a lot of them in the northeast part of the country, a lot of them in Pennsylvania specifically. We have worked up a new methodology to do this work in partnership with North Carolina University, and are launching these studies next week. And part of certainly the traffic counting apparatus that is in place now is going to be a big factor in helping us with these economic impact studies as well. And with that, thank you all very much for being on, and I think I'm going to pass the microphone back over to Eli for our next presenter.
Yes, thank you very much, Eric, for that look into the IHTC's counting efforts. Now we're going to move east to hear from Shawn Megill Legendre with DBRPC. Shawn, are you ready to take control of your screen?
Yes, I am. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me on today. As Eli stated, my name is Shawn Megill Legendre. I'm a senior research analyst with the Office of Environmental Planning and the Office of Energy and Climate Change Initiative at DBRPC. Today I'm just going to give you a quick overview, but hopefully with lots of information, of DBRPC's automated counting program for regional trails. First, just a short introduction to the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. We're the metropolitan planning organization for Greater Philadelphia, so this includes the city of Philadelphia and 8 surrounding counties in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Our board, the commission, is composed of representatives of these counties, the major cities in the region, as well as the 2 states. MPOs like DBRPC are primarily transportation planning organizations, and our board plays a key role in deciding how federal transportation funding gets spent in our region. And this includes funding not only for highway projects and transit improvements, but also for pedestrian and bicycle activities. In our neck of the woods, we have 352 municipalities in our region. Those of you familiar with the eastern part of the United States know in many places in the east we have these many small municipalities across a geographic area. Land use decisions are also reside at the local level. So when it comes to planning at the regional level, it really involves more carrots than sticks and more consensus building than confrontation or regulation. So as an MPO staff, we seek to develop helpful planning tools, communicate best practices, and generally support our counties and municipalities in creating healthier, prosperous futures for their residents. So why do we count? In Greater Philadelphia, as was mentioned, we've launched an effort to build a 750-mile plus network called the Circuit Trails. This effort is formalized in the region's long-range plan maintained by DBRPC and embraced by the region's governments as well as the cycling advocacy community. So counting allows us to describe how this network and others are being used, providing both ourselves and our planning partners with robust, reliable, and long-term data. The availability of long-term data allows us to track trends and show the impact of capital investment. This, in turn, hopefully promotes additional capital investment, and all of this generally creates a buzz around active transportation networks. And creating a greater public awareness of these networks can help spur greater public use of them as well as support of them. So it's important to note that though I'm representing DBRPC today, a lot of the day-to-day county operations that are involved here and much of the work that I'm going to be showing off today is completed by DBRPC's Office of Travel Monitoring. And our Office of Transit, Bicycle, and Pedestrian Planning also has played a key role in fostering the counting program that I'm going to talk about today. So today I'm going to mostly speak about our permanently installed counters on regional trails, but it's important to put this in the context of our broader counting program. We've adopted a counting program based on the Federal Highway Administration's Travel Monitoring Guide. Our program consists of two primary types of counting. Permanently installed counters recording data 365 days a year, and short duration counters, which remain installed for about a week. Short duration counts are taken both on a recurring basis in the same locations every 3 years, and also for project-specific purposes, such as before and after counts and non-motorized traffic studies in particular areas. Short duration counters, because they can be moved from location to location, as Eric described, widen our geographic reach. The permanently installed counters, though they do provide continuous data at the locations in which they are installed, maintaining a large network of those would just be too cost prohibitive. And I'll talk about how these two components of the program interact a little bit later. But the permanent counters do allow us to set adjustment factors, and I'll describe how that works a little bit later, like I said, so that we can predict annual average daily bicycle traffic and total annual traffic where short duration counts are taken. Like I said, this is extremely helpful for planning purposes and to normalize counts taken at different times of year and in different weather. DVRPC now maintains a network of 15 permanent bicycle and pedestrian counters, all funded initially by the William Penn Foundation, a locally based foundation in Philadelphia. 3 of those 15 were installed in cooperation also with the Pennsylvania Environmental Council, and an additional counter will be installed this year with the support from the Schuylkill River Development Corporation, as well as the William Penn Foundation again. We use, for these counters, counters from EcoCounter. Like I said, they collect and report data continuously throughout the year. They do this in 15-minute increments, by direction and by user type. The data is reported wirelessly, which may not seem like a big deal, but our short-term counters don't do this. We physically collect that hardware and bring it back to the office. The permanent counters use a combination of an infrared sensor in an inductive loop to detect and distinguish bicycle and pedestrian traffic. This equipment, the equipment that we use, costs about $6,000 per installation. There are also a variety of ongoing costs, such as wireless service, battery replacements, and general maintenance. So those are some of the costs that I was talking about in terms of if you have too many of these, it does become a very expensive program. The installation process takes an experienced 2-person team about half a day. It's labor-intensive, but a fairly straightforward process involving the placement of a wooden post containing an infrared sensor and an underground box containing the data processing components in the ground off the edge of the trail, and the installation of diamond-shaped inductive loops on or within the trail. You can see each type of inductive loop that we use in our network in these pictures. In the upper left is an inductive loop that is being cut in, placed inside the asphalt of the trail, and then will be sealed over with a sealant. Directly below that, so the bottom left, we have installation using a heavy-duty tape that's just being used to tape the inductive loop to the surface of the trail. This is what we used initially. It's been very durable. This is heavy-duty tape, mastic tape, the kind of thing you would use on certain road projects. Many of these counters have lasted for quite a number of years, but as you could probably see, any trail where snow plowing happens, these can start to take on damage over the course of a couple of winters. And we have replaced some of them. We are moving from these taped down inductive loops to the in pavement inductive loops as we sort of work through and upgrade our system in the future. We also have 2 in soil installations on 2 of our canal trails in the region. This is essentially an inductive loop that's in a rigid case that is buried in the ground, and it operates in very much the same way as the in-pavement loop shown above. Our 15 and soon-to-be 16 counters are spread throughout the region. Our current 15 are labeled in dark violet on this map, with the one new counter depicted in light violet. Locations for permanent counters were chosen based on a variety of factors, so it's important to note that in addition to recreational trails, we also are seeking out trails that were used as commutation routes. So we worked with our county and city board members and other stakeholders to identify these locations. We also sought trails in a variety of environments from the urban to the rural, along a similar line to what Eric discussed. Of course, for any location, the support of trail owners was incredibly important. When it comes to cutting open a trail, they definitely need to be involved. And so without their permission and cooperation, a lot of these installations just couldn't have happened. DVRPC displays our data from the counters on our permanent counter web portal. The URL is down on the bottom of the screen. This web page provides a snapshot of data from each counter that has more than a year of uninterrupted data. Users can also access detailed historical data and sort of use it in whatever form they want for each site by clicking on the Access Detailed Data tagged after each of the trail names. So this is our public-facing data portal that's out there for the public to use and access data about these trails. So what can we do with these counters? We can, of course, look at use across the network and on individual trails. We can, in 2016, the 9 counters shown here recorded over 2.6 million counts. A count is a single pass of the counter, so if an individual goes down the trail and then comes back, they will record 2 counts. This isn't unlike the data available for motorized vehicle traffic, which tracks passes, not the number of distinct vehicles, which is really total traffic is what we're after, and total use, not necessarily total number of users. As you can see in our region, there's a great variety of use. The counter on Schuylkill Banks, by far the most popular segment of the circuit trails, recorded over 1.7 million counts. Schuylkill Banks lies directly adjacent to Center City and is connected to the extensive Schuylkill River Trail. The counter on the Port Richmond Trail, sort of on the other side of the scale, is a counter that's on what is now an isolated segment, but a trail segment that will eventually be part of the future Delaware River Trail and East Coast Greenway. This trail today, in 2016, recorded just 30,000 counts, but we expect that to increase as the network becomes more connected. We can look at the impact of investments in the trail network on trail use, such as before and after counts on the Kinwood Heritage Trail following completion of the Manioc Bridge. The Manioc Bridge Trail project repurposed an old railroad bridge to create a bicycle and pedestrian connection between Manioc in Philadelphia and the Kinwood Heritage Trail in nearby Lower Merion Township in Montgomery County. And though the increased weekend use sticks out here and is probably what catches your eye, what is particularly interesting is the increased weekday use, suggesting possible increased use of this trail for commuting purposes. This may increase further as the trail is extended through Lower Merion towards Philadelphia's University City. And this will provide a direct route from Philadelphia's residential neighborhoods in the northwest to this major employment center. Looking across the year, you can see there's a great deal of seasonal variation. I'm now focusing on cyclists in these counts. But here's where it gets interesting. Looking at early 2017, we have 2 weekends separated by about a month in what generally should be a warming trend. Saturday and Sunday, February 19th and 20th, provided partly cloudy days with highs of about 70 degrees. If I recall correctly, this was our first nice weekend of the year, and our counts reflect that. People are getting out and enjoying the outdoors. But about a month later, Saturday and Sunday, March 11th and 12th, delivered high temperatures right around freezing. Our counts dropped significantly in comparison to that February weekend a month before. This points to the need for adjustment factors that can take into account these daily variations if you plan to use short duration counts to say anything about what happens in a particular location across the course of a year. In order to develop daily adjustment factors, you must first gather your permanent counters into factor groups. You're going to see different factor groups used here as what Eric used, but the concept is the same. In our network, we currently have 3 classifications that we use. Mixed utilitarian and recreation. These trails show telltale, sometimes one-directional rush hours on the weekdays, but they also have evening peaks on the weekdays and midday peaks on the weekends, typical of recreation. We also have recreational trails. These trails tend to only have the evening peaks on weekdays and midday peaks on weekends, no or very minimal rush hour period. And what's interesting here is the trail typology is very similar for each of these trail groups. They're both at least 10-foot wide asphalt trails, and so it's really just their location that is causing their factor group to be different. We also have low volume trails. These trails generally do not have enough traffic to determine whether they are being used for commuting or recreation or both. Some of these trails, like I mentioned before, are in locations that as they become more connected, you could start to see some of the factor group signals that would allow them to fall into the groups that are listed above or other groups that we identify as we move forward. Once you've classified your data, you can set adjustment factors. First, you take your total annual traffic on a set of trails. You divide this by 365 or 366 in the case of a leap year to get the daily average across the course of a year. Then you can take that daily average and divide it by the actual level of traffic on any particular day, say 399, to get the adjustment factor, which is essentially a multiplier that you could apply to any other count taken that day to determine what the approximate daily average for that particular location is. This adjustment factor will take into account general seasonal trends, but also specific weather that occurred on that day. So just a handful of notes about these adjustment factors. You need to take short duration counts of at least a week in order to allow you to classify them into factor groups. Otherwise, you won't be able to see those signals of rush hours and evening peaks and midday peaks. You also need a small but sufficient sample of permanent counters. You want specific events and localized weather to be averaged out by using multiple counters for each factor group. You can never completely eliminate these effects, but a group of 2 to 3 counters in each factor group should help you minimize them. Another thing to note about our work so far specifically is that we're only using adjustment factors to look back at a given year and to use short duration counts that were taken during a particular year to estimate annual traffic in those locations or average daily traffic in those locations. We're not yet using them in a predictive capacity, but one could see ways that you would be able to do that by averaging effects across a set of years and that kind of thing. Some lessons learned overall with our program. It's definitely easiest to evolve the program from existing work. That's what we did when we expanded from short duration project counts and our once every 5-year center city cordon counts to recurring short duration counts throughout the region, as well as our permanent counter network. It's important to engage stakeholders from the beginning. For us, this helps select locations, but it also helps ease installation, as we had already built up relationships with the people whose trails we were about to cut apart. It's important to share data widely to build a constituency both amongst planning partners as well as the broader public. And definitely as you approach a program like this, you need to commit to the long-term maintenance that it involves. You really want to make sure the program that you design is right-sized both to your capacity as well as your needs. You don't need to, if you have a specific set of questions, you don't need equipment that answers questions outside of that realm. So with that, I'll say thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions during the question and answer time.
Thank you so much, Shawn, for that. I know that I've learned a lot from experimenting with DVR-PC's online data, and it's fascinating to see the behind-the-scenes process of how that sausage is made, so to speak. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our last presenter, Barry Bergman. You ready to take control of the screen, Barry?
Sure am. Okay, we're ready to go? Is everything visible?
You look good to me.
Okay. Well, thanks, Eli. Thanks for the introduction. And yeah, I'm Barry Bergman. I'm with Rails to Trails Conservancy's Western Region office in Oakland, California. And so I'm going to touch a bit on some of the efforts that we are involved with in trying to develop a regional count program here. So I'm certainly going to touch on some of the concepts that Shawn in particular was mentioning. DVR-PC is probably more out front on this issue than any other MPO, and so they're definitely a useful model, and hopefully we can learn from their experience. And it's great to see that they're using a lot of their key trails as a big part of their program. I think sometimes there's a bit of a bifurcation between trails and on-street facilities, and so it's important to include all of that. So I guess I want to kind of target this at folks who may not be so fortunate to live in a place with all the resources to develop a fully functional count program, and you know, or that does not have an agency willing to really take the lead and run with it. So what we are doing here in the Bay Area, Rails to Trails has been coordinating a partnership of trail-focused organizations. It includes a broad range of agencies and advocacy groups, ranging from transportation agencies to park agencies, bicycle advocates, public health professionals, some consulting firms. And so we are focused on developing our regional trail network, which I would say is somewhat different than the others. So I'll illustrate that in a little bit. It's really more of what I would call a network of networks, and that we have several major networks that have been in development for quite a while that we're trying to pull together. So let me start with, this is similar to a slide that Shawn showed, and so I'm not going to belabor this, but I would say in our initial discussions with partners around the region, number one, the first thing that came up when talking about counting users was we need data to support our funding applications. And so I put that right at the top. The second thing that I'd like to mention a little bit more about, because I think it sometimes goes unsaid, although probably kind of implied, is that counts are a great way to help to demonstrate the value of your trails and to elevate them in the minds of the general public, and perhaps most importantly, elected officials. It really helps to build support for trails when you can show exactly how popular they are. So just a little bit of context. There's been a growing increase in getting bike and ped count data around the country. A few things to point out here, and I did compile some resources at the end of the presentation. Federal Highway Administration has really been making some strides. The most recent traffic monitoring guide from 2016 does specifically address this issue with a focus on automated counts and using manual counts to supplement that. The Traffic Monitoring Analysis System, otherwise known as TMAS, is a database that has been used to collect data on various modes and has only recently been able to incorporate bicycle and pedestrian information. That's a database available to agencies, although not to the general public. And then most recently, they also completed a bicycle pedestrian count technology pilot project where they partnered with 10 MPOs around the country. So this is clearly a growing interest at the federal level. I also wanted to mention National Cooperative Highway Research Program, NCHRP Report 797, which probably has more information than you would ever want about various count technologies. I'm going to be talking, and as Eric and Shawn have both talked about, is counting technology applied really to trails, but NCHRP 797 has all kinds of other stuff in there. And then a couple of other things happening that are broader. The Portland State University has been working on developing a bike ped portal, which with the intention of bringing together databases from across the country into a centralized place, and to enable comparisons across the country. And also, this is something from a bit further back that many of you are probably familiar with, the National Bicycle and Pedestrian Documentation Project, which provides some guidelines around collecting manual counts. So this really just talks about what Shawn earlier spoke about. That's an example of a permanent count station on the right, and on the lower left, mobile counters often use pneumatic tubes as a way of detecting bicycles, and those can be shifted around as needed to other locations, and that way you can differentiate between bicycles and pedestrians. As far as manual counts, I mentioned the National Bicycle and Pedestrian Documentation Project. They have all kinds of great resources that you can download. It obviously provides a much narrower window of usage, and depending on weather conditions and location and any other variables, it may or may not provide a very accurate slice of trail usage. But it is very valuable in the sense that you can get some additional data that you can't otherwise get with a counter. You may be able to pair it with an intercept survey or be able to pick up characteristics of the users, such as how many children or helmet use or things like that. I also have a image here in the center of the screen of an app that Rails to Trails developed called Go Counter, which is designed to be used with the National Bicycle Pedestrian Documentation Project methodology. So it's a nice, easy way of collecting your count data other than writing it down on a pad and then having to transfer it. So you can just upload and sync it to your database. And both Eric and Shawn talked about using adjustment factors. I think for those of us who do not have well-established factors in our area, we have a kind of a simplistic tool, but something that is certainly of value. And it's available on our website. It uses climate based on Department of Energy climatic zones, so that gives you at least a good approximation of to be able to account for things like usage in San Diego versus Minneapolis, which can obviously vary considerably. I'll highlight a couple of examples of how to successfully use your data. This is something from the East Bay Regional Parks District here in California, and they were able to document the pattern of usage along their trail as compared to a parallel highway. And you can see that there is a peak hour travel bump, and that was something that paralleled very closely to the vehicle use, so they were able to make a good case for commute patterns, and it supported their Tiger Grant application for $10 million. As far as manual counts, the city of San Jose has done quite a bit of this over the years. They do this annually, and one of the things I really like about what they do is that they have made a very strong effort to package it in a way that it's easily digestible. This is an image of a fact sheet that they have. They also do a more fleshed out report. All of this is available on their website. But by just a quick glance, you can see how the trends have tracked over time. It's something that if you want to pass along to an elected official, they can get it instantly. So when you're looking for resources to support the project development, this is just a great thing to be able to use. There's another example from the Bay Area, from the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. They have some very high volume locations. The highest one, they had 1.8 million at a location on the Bay Trail. And I'm sure the Golden Gate Bridge is higher, although they do not seem to have counters there. It's monitored by a different agency. I mentioned the Bay Area Trails Collaborative. This is an effort that Rails to Trails is coordinating. We have a large region, 9 counties, 101 cities, and 7 million people. Our group, we have over 80 organizations involved. We really probably have a core of about 25 that have the most involvement. And we've been meeting since 2014. And count data was identified probably at the first meeting as one of our high priorities. So we're looking to work with our partners to complete the network through a combination of advocacy, recruiting partners, and sharing best practices among the various agencies working on trails. This is of our existing and proposed network. As I said, it's really kind of a network of networks. So for example, 2 of the major efforts in this area, the Bay Area Ridge Trail and the San Francisco Bay Trail, are both over 500 miles long each. And then so what we've done is taken those along with the California Coastal Trail, which will be statewide, and additional existing and paved trails around the 9-county Bay Area, and combined them into a single network. When completed, it'll be over about 2,500 miles, and nearly 60% is currently on the ground. So what we did in order to make our case to develop this program, we were working with our MPO and wanted to provide some background and some information to demonstrate the value of a count program. So at the Trails Collaborative, we worked with our partners to develop this report. And so we started by documenting existing practices among our partners. And there were a handful of agencies that currently do counts, a few of the transportation agencies. The ones that were clearly in the lead on this were the park agencies. And that's something that they're continuing to grow their capacity to purchase additional counters. But this does give some basis for establishing a program that there is data already being collected. So we developed a set of recommendations that we have provided to our MPO and shared with other potential partners in the area. One, we wanted to have some kind of web-based data sharing, similar to the DVRPC website, that this be available to the public. And just wanted to mention, I think Shawn mentioned this as well, and I think this is a really important point, is just to make sure that there's sufficient funding for managing and operating this going forward. This is really, it's not something you want to create and have it just languish and die. It should be something that is used and that there are resources identified up front. A counter loaner program is something we are very interested in. A couple of the counties here already have this kind of thing, and it's because equipment is such a barrier to doing counts. This will provide a lot more jurisdictions and agencies with the ability to go out and conduct and develop some counts, particularly as grant application opportunities come up. Consistent guidelines, just to have a reasonably consistent database across the board. And our MPO, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, in response, after having some of these conversations with them, they've really been very receptive and are in agreement with a lot of the recommendations we have. So we've been working through their committees to advance this. And they have hired a consultant to do a needs assessment and to develop a lot of these cost estimates and come up with a range of options. So that has been a really productive process. And just to elaborate a little bit on the idea of the regional data sharing, so like I said, we do have a number of agencies that are currently collecting data, so we want to use that as kind of a foundation. We're not seeing that a large amount of new technology is going to be suddenly purchased and distributed around here, so we want to definitely use what we've got. Allow local agencies to upload their own data into this larger database, and then also lay the groundwork for some future collection through the loaner program, through providing training. And we want to make sure that all of the different types of data that are being collected are included in this database. So while we see the automated counters as a really important central part of getting a picture of regional trail use, we also want to have the automated counters, both the permanent and the mobile counters, as well as the manual counts. And also because many of our partners, as I said, we have park agencies, not just transportation-related trails, which is really more of the focus of the MPO and some of the transportation agencies. We want to be able to include some of the recreational trails as well, just to provide a complete picture of trail use. And the final point is to make sure that whatever we put together is consistent with the national guidelines that are being developed, so that as these national efforts spread, that whatever is produced here could be integrated into those larger efforts and do some cross-state comparisons. So I just had a few examples. Shawn showed the DVRPC website. I just took a few screenshots of some other sites. They all have somewhat different look to them, different functionality. Arlington County, Virginia, I think a really nice interface about how you can search by date, time, day of the week, facility type. The Intertwine Trail Network in Portland, Oregon, and I showed this because this is only trails. These are all manual counts, so it's somewhat different. You can see the history of trail use at particular locations. In Los Angeles region, the Southern California Association of Governments and Metro have put together a site. This has been up and running for a couple of years now. This is bike counts only. They're only manual counts. And they are in the process of doing a major upgrade of this site, and it's worth keeping an eye on. It should be rolling out, I believe, later this year. But what they're going to be doing is a lot of the things that we are interested in doing. They want to add the pedestrian part of the data, but also accommodate automated counts. And they've been working with an extensive stakeholder group to really build out the functionality. They are going way above and beyond what we have been talking about in our region, including lots of other features of the street network and lane widths and all kinds of things that can be integrated into that system. So that's a large budget effort. I'm going to mention another data option. This is something that's been growing a lot of use. Has a lot of interest in this has come up in the last few years. The use of crowdsourced data such as Strava, and this is a shot from the Strava heat map, which is global. If you go to their website, you can see this. It's actually even used in places like Madagascar. You can see people bicycling all around the world. The thickness of the lines shows the level of usage, and so it includes trails, it includes roads. And if you're familiar with San Francisco, for example, you can see that it does show both recreational and more commuter-oriented use. So there's kind of a diagonal line in the upper right of San Francisco, which is Market Street. So there's certainly a lot of bike commuter traffic on Market Street. At the very top of the map is the Golden Gate Bridge. On the western side of the map is a trail along the ocean. And so it's both trails and heavy commuter routes that show up. So the real limitation of this is that it's only based on whoever uses the app, and so it tends to be biased toward recreational use. A lot of shorter trips, people don't tend to turn on the app, but in any case, you can get a large amount of data, and it's certainly worth exploring to see how this could be applied, though probably not as the primary data source. An example of overlaying the Strava data with a trail map. This is a section of the Bay Area Ridge Trail. So the dashed line is the Ridge Trail alignment, and then the orange lines show the usage based on the Strava data. Again, this is a resource page that I've compiled here. There's new stuff coming out all the time, and but if you're looking and diving into this in more depth, there's some good places to start here. So I think just to kind of wrap it up, I think we want to, if you're embarking on a new program, I would say start by definitely get a sense of what's going on around the country, because you can really learn a lot from the approaches different places have taken and some of the pitfalls. I would also emphasize, think about how you want to use your data when you go about putting a program together. I do think that this is certainly great as a planning tool. It can really help bolster applications, but I wouldn't leave out the more public-facing use of this kind of thing. Keep in mind the consistency with the standard data formats that are being developed. You want to be able to think ahead and hopefully apply whatever data you collect into larger data sets that are being accumulated. And then again, to think about the maintenance costs, what's involved in dealing with the data as it comes in, what's involved in maintaining counter equipment. Eric mentioned a couple of counters that got stolen. There are just certain costs that you may not anticipate. And if you do something like a counter loaner program, one of the things to think about that I've heard from several people who administer these kinds of programs is it's really important to have an agency on the ground that is used to dealing with this kind of equipment. Probably a public works agency or a parks department, but otherwise it's very difficult to administer something like that from a central location. So that's about all I've got. Eli, I guess I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Barry, and a huge thank you to all three of our panelists. That concludes our scheduled presentation. We're a little bit over time, which is what happens when you have such rich content. We have about 5 minutes to answer maybe 1 or 2 questions we've been receiving. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute all of our panelists, and if you self-muted, could you go ahead and unmute yourself there too? So one question I got via email from Sharon Tabor, I think is probably one that a lot of people will have, and I'm going to open this up to all of our panelists, but she asks, what methods should small communities in rural areas use to determine trail usage for hiking and bike routes since they don't have the financial resources discussed by basically all three of our presenters? So I'll open it up to any of you to answer. Just jump in.
This is Eric with Rails to Trails Conservancy, and I can tell you, manual counting has been going on for a long time. And RTC just developed last year an app on your smartphone called Go Counter, which is a great way to go about manual counting. You can go out in the field with your smartphone or tablet, and you don't have to have a piece of paper. You don't have to go back and do manual data entry. So for rural areas that absolutely can't get access to automated counter equipment, then going out and doing manual counts is one way to do it. And if you use an app like that, you don't have to worry about data entry. We also have a forecaster on our website, a trail traffic forecaster. So if you go out and get enough data, you can plug that into our forecaster based on where you are in the country. We have different factor models, and you can extrapolate an annual use count there as well. So there are ways to get traffic count data without expensive automated counters, but just realize that a smaller sample size is much harder to extrapolate to an annual use with any degree of the smaller your sample size, the less sure of that extrapolated annual count you can be.
This is Shawn from DVRPC. I think this also goes to my point of really thinking about what you're trying to accomplish with your program. So DVRPC takes a very sort of complex approach because one of the answers, or one of the questions we're trying to ask and get answers about is how people are using the multi-use trail network to commute and for utilitarian purposes. But if, on the other hand, you're just trying to get simple use data, in multiple locations, one infrared counter that you move from place to place may be all you need. So that's a much different, scale of expense. As people mentioned, as they were presenting, look for counter loan programs. Every once in a while, other opportunities come up. The federal government recently funded a number of MPOs to sort of start bike ped counting programs, invest in some equipment, that kind of thing. And then if you do have an agency or an entity like some of the ones discussed nearby to you, you can sort of look to them for certain things. So for instance, anybody sort of beyond the greater Philadelphia region, but still, beyond that 9-county region, but still within sort of the general weather patterns that affect Philadelphia and its surroundings, could probably use our adjustment factors to apply to just short duration counts if they didn't want to have a whole permanent counter program like we do. And we're more than happy to share that data. And the same may be true of other entities that have collected similar data and made similar calculations.
All right, thank you guys. So unfortunately, we've run out of time. Anyone who submitted questions but that we didn't have time to answer, of which there are quite a few of you, I will forward those on to our presenters, and hopefully we can assemble some kind of short list that we can pass on to all of you so you can get some answers to your good questions. Thanks again to all three of our panelists and to our attendees. I really hope you found the presentation informative and useful as you either continue your great work on or consider a new vision for a large trail network in your region. Again, you'll be receiving a follow-up email shortly after this webinar with a link to the recorded version, a feedback survey, and contact information in case any of your questions went unanswered. And as I said, that's quite a few of you, unfortunately. But with that being said, thanks again, everyone, for attending. We really hope you join us for another webinar in the near future, and enjoy the rest of your day.